And the CEO of investment bank Jefferies, Rich Handler, fired off an email yesterday to show his appreciation for junior bankers working long hours. Analysts and associates can choose from a Peloton bike, a Mirror home workout system, or an Apple package that includes an iPad, Apple Watch, and AirPods with AppleCare. In his email, Handler said it's, quote, the very least we can do. Now, the company insists the rewards have been in the works for weeks and weeks and are not in response to recent headlines about overworked analysts on Wall Street. Scarlet, I think you know what this is related to.
Yeah, you're referring to Goldman Sachs, the most Wall Street of Wall Street firms that's trying to make peace with some of its junior bankers. This is after they aired their grievances in the most meta of ways through an online slide presentation titled Working Conditions Survey that they shared with their managers, and then it went viral on social media. According to the 13 respondents in the survey, Goldman junior bankers work an average of 100 plus hours per week. They have no time to eat or shower, and they can only get 5 hours of sleep per night. Goldman says it is listening to their concerns and will take multiple steps to address them. Maddie and I are, of course, fascinated by all this, so we're bringing in Bill Keenan now to discuss it with us. Bill was once a junior investment banker at Deutsche Bank. He wrote a book about it called Discussion Materials. He left the industry, and he's now COO of Airmail, which is the digital magazine launched by Graydon Carter. Bill, always great to speak with you. These junior bankers have a point. There's clearly no work-life balance there, but also, small violin here, this is part of the deal. They get paid really well. They get fleece vests that say Goldman Sachs on it. They get those cool gym bags. I mean, pretty much anyone who goes into banking at Goldman Sachs knows what they're getting into, don't they?
Well, thank you guys for having me on. I think for sure when you know what you're getting into when you sign up, I think, like you said. I think my first gut reaction is what you touched on, the fact that they resort to creating a pitch deck is kind of tells the whole story, because that's the only way to communicate kind of the way for them to be heard, and it tells you a lot about, I think, when you talk about the culture of a bank, and they couldn't just, there wasn't anyone there to go to, so let's float a viral pitch deck. And the other thing I have to say, Scarlet is the 13 respondents, having put in numbers in those decks, you always have to be careful, because I made up about 90% of those numbers. So I want to be careful with how much we read into that. But definitely, yes, it's an issue.
Bill, definitely appreciate the honesty there. And you mentioned this going viral. I think one of the reasons Scarlett and I talked about it going viral is because a lot of these comments are kind of relatable for a lot of people who struggle with their jobs. I want to point out one particularly savage quote from the deck. One banker saying, "I've been through foster care. This is arguably worse." Bill, what is your reaction to that quote? I mean, I'm wondering, is this just a generation of young people who aren't willing to accept the terms of Wall Street and, the kind of hazing of this environment being sort of a rite of passage?
Well, I mean, that's horrifying to think that someone, if that's what happened, that's how they feel. When I look at this, I think, what are some of the solutions? And it's funny, because when I went to the end of the deck and some of these points that they're takeaways there on the last page, I'd actually disagree with a number. The first being, they talk about being pencils down, meaning basically stop work, 12 hours before a deck is due to go out or a meeting's supposed to happen. And from my experience, I mean, the way banking works is no one spends any time. You got to feel like you're always working. So you spend a couple of weeks on these things, and then it's a mad dash for the last 12 hours. So why not just not do anything until the last 12 hours? Make it a painful 12 hours, but just have it be limited to that 12 hours. And then, the 90 hours a week, honestly, because the system is so inefficient, I think you're not actually working. The problem there is that you're on call, in essence. You're like a doctor. You have to sit there, and it's almost worse because you don't know. Think of the anguish you go through when you know something bad is about to happen, but you just don't know. You can't see it. It's not tangible yet.
Right.
So it's almost worse waiting. And so if you can basically say this, I remember my favorite VP said, hey, he'd send me an email. The next 24 hours are going to be awful. I expect you to share this with everyone in the bullpen. And at least then I know it's this is going to be bad for 24 hours. But he wouldn't make it, over the course of 2 weeks, creating a deck, market updating, all this nonsense.
Okay, Bill, you're clearly still traumatized from your years at Deutsche Bank. I mean, it's very clear. And I mean, one thing, again, that we're so taken by in this deck is all these charts. There's a pie chart on excessive monitoring and micromanaging. Apparently, 83% of the respondents, the 13 respondents, feel that there was too much monitoring. They've also quantified how their physical health has worsened. There was a 6.7-point drop, a pretty steep arrow that goes down. Again, all visually presented. How come people spend so much time on these decks? I mean, you talk about these presentation decks. I don't recall a lot of people reading them from cover to cover and using any of the information in there, especially if you're making up numbers like you just said. Why do bankers spend so much time on these decks?
It's a crutch. I think the meetings that I went to, it's just kind of covering your bases. As I remember, the most successful MDs that I worked for, we'd go in and it was a conversation about their kids, and then it was a handshake, and the deal was done. And I think this is something that's maybe a newer thing to. It just makes you feel like, hey, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but here's like 1,000 pie charts and tons of colors and gradients that, is anything interesting to you here? And I think it's just a way to kind of corroborate. I've done a lot of work, and it makes you feel good, but as far as actually getting anything done, I agree. I think it's like I got the right answer, but I didn't show my work when you're in school. But ultimately, I think it's just a way it's definitely evolved, and you have so much more access now. It's not just going through an SEC filing. You've got these FactSet and Morningstar. I mean, there's all these databases full of numbers. So you can kind of get lost in the weeds and forget what the point of the whole thing is.
And Bill, we should mention that this is a really serious issue here. I mean, a few years ago, a Bank of America intern did die 3 years ago, after working for 3 straight days. So this is a systemic issue in banking, right? How much of the banks changed their approach to junior bankers following that death?
Yeah, I mean, that's another horrifying thing to think that happened. It just, it gives you some insight into what, these kids are being taken advantage of. And I think when you come right from school, you have no other, I came from business school. I did stuff before out in the world, and I had an understanding of sometimes, I want to be treated like a human, and maybe I'm being taken advantage of, and being able to stand up for yourself. I think that's harder to do when you come right out of college, like some of these analysts do, or I guess all of them. But I think, when you hear something like that, this is like a leadership thing. And, I'm not just talking about somebody going and jetting off and in the news. I'm talking like I saw a response that from the Goldman CEO that said this is he's upset, and it's a collaborative apprenticeship business. And it's to me that's laughable, because I mean, I think of an apprentice like a cobbler. Like there was nothing about the environment being an apprenticeship. That might have been back in the day, when he was doing it. But MDs have allegiances to money and their clients, and they will go to whatever bank. So
Very well said.
To have some leadership to actually take action and I mean it's seriously spiraled out of control with things like that. I don't have the answer. That's why I'm no longer in it. But
Bill, sounds like you made the right decision, and you're doing far better because of it. I think at the end of the day, it's just that banking has lost its shine. It's no longer the sexy job that people aspire to that it once was. Thank you so much, Bill Keenan.